In this video, I'm going to show you how to solve quadratic absolute value equations using algebra. The idea is very similar to solving linear absolute value equations. We'll just split the absolute value equation into two equations, each which doesn't have any absolute value, and then we'll solve them individually. So to split it into two equations, we have to consider what can be inside of the absolute value. If the absolute value is 4, then inside of the absolute value can either be positive 4 or negative 4. So now we've got two equations that we can solve individually. We'll solve the first one by adding 3 to both sides. X squared equals 7, so x equals plus or minus root 7. And then solve the second one, add 3 to both sides. X squared equals negative 1, and this equation has no solution. So now we combine our equations to get x equals negative root 7 or positive root 7. And this is the solution to that quadratic absolute value equation. Here's a more complicated quadratic absolute value equation. The key to solving these more complicated absolute value equations is always to isolate the absolute value first. So let's subtract 1 from both sides to get rid of that 1. Then, to get rid of the negative sign in front, we'll multiply both sides of the equation by negative 1. Now we're at a point where we can split up the equation into two equations without the absolute value. What's inside the absolute value can either be 3 or negative 3. So we'll write an equation for each possibility. 3 or negative 3. And then we'll solve each possibility independently. Starting with the first one, we're going to subtract 3 from both sides to get the quadratic equal to 0. Then we can simplify this a bit by dividing everything by 2. And then we'll apply the quadratic formula. X equals negative of negative 1, so 1, plus or minus root negative 1 squared is 1, then minus 4 times 1 times negative 1, so really plus 4, all over 2. X equals 1 plus or minus root 5 over 2. Now for the other one, we do the same thing. We're going to add 3 to get the equation equal to 0. We'll simplify this by dividing by 2. And then we'll apply the quadratic formula. So 1 plus or minus root of 1 minus 4 times 1 times 2 is 8 over 2. So x equals 1 plus or minus root negative 7 over 2. But because inside of the root is negative, that actually means there's no solution. Now we'll combine our findings into the full solution. X equals 1 minus root 5 over 2 and 1 plus root 5 over 2. And this is the solution to that quadratic absolute value equation. We'll do one last example, which is even more complicated. To simplify this expression, we can just combine everything inside of the absolute value. And expand it out inside of the absolute value. And now we're at a point where we can split up the absolute value equation into the two possibilities. First, the inside of the absolute value can equal 2, or it can equal negative 2. We'll start by solving the first possibility. We'll subtract 2 from both sides to get the quadratic equation equal to 0, and then we can factor this really easily by just pulling out an x. 3x minus 7 equals 0, so either x equals 0 or 3x minus 7 equals 0, and solving this we've got 3x equals 7, x equals 7 over 3. So these are the two solutions for that possibility. Now time to solve the second possibility. We'll add 2 to both sides to get that side equal to 0. And then we'll do the quadratic equation. X equals 7 plus or minus square root of negative 7 squared is 49, minus 4 times 3 times 4, that's minus 48. All over 2 times 3 is 6. So simplifying that expression, we've got just 1, it's root 1, which is just 1, then over 6. So x equals 7 plus 1 over 6, which is 8 over 6, or 7 minus 1 over 6, which is 6 over 6. So x equals 4/3, or 1. And to get the full solution to our original equation here, we have to combine all the solutions that we got by splitting it up. So x equals 0, 1, 4/3, 7/3, just writing them in order of increasing numbers. And that's it, we've got our solution. The main takeaway here is that quadratic absolute value equations are really just like the linear ones. You simplify it to a point where you've got the absolute value on one side, and then you split it up into 2 equations, and you can solve them independently, and then you can combine the solutions.